What does it matter if Africa looks smaller than it is on the map? A lot. A lot, a lot. So it's a good thing that the African Union is now involved in this matter. I know they have a lot of things that they should also be focusing on, from the wars that are on this continent that shouldn't be happening at all, but they can be able to multitask, just like you and I normally do. So let's talk about that. Why this size of Africa as projected on the map, why that matters. Why that matters. The African Union has joined calls to end the use of the Mercator Map. Before you roll your eyes and say that it's just a map, take a look at your screen right now. Look closely. Do you see Greenland up there? It looks almost the same size as Africa. Shocking, right? Now, here's the truth. Africa is 14 times bigger than Greenland. 14 times. Yet the map that we have used for 5 centuries lies straight to our faces. Let's now step back. Where did this map even come from? In 1569, a Flemish cartographer named Gerardus Mercator designed this projection, this map. His goal was to help sailors navigate the seas by stretching land near the poles and compressing land near the equator. He made it possible to draw a straight lines, navigation across the oceans. For sailors in the 16th century, this was totally revolutionary. But there was one problem. What worked for those sailors has proved disastrous for Africa. That distortion made Europe look bigger than it is. Greenland and Europe look enormous, whereas Africa looks small. For centuries, the world kept using this map, not because it was accurate, but because it reinforced a worldview, a Eurocentric worldview. Okay, let's look back at this map again. Europe almost matches Africa in size, but in reality, Africa is much bigger. You can fit the entire United States, China, India, Japan, and most of Europe inside Africa. Algeria alone, one country, is bigger than all of Western Europe. The Democratic Republic of Congo, the mighty Congo, is larger than Spain, France, Germany, and Sweden combined. Yet, on this Mercator map, these African giants look like small provinces. All right, let's talk about psychology now. You see, maps don't just show the world, they shape the world. They mold the world. They are not just mirrors. Let's talk about 9 psychological pillars that prove this. First, visual anchoring. When you see something the same way for years and years, and in this case, Africa shrunken in the corner, your brain takes that as the baseline. That becomes the normal size in your mental map. And once an anchor is set, everything else is judged against it. So when people hear that Africa has 1.4 billion people, or that it's bigger than the US, China, India combined, those numbers feel unbelievable. The anchor is wrong, so the truth feels wrong. Second, the looking glass self. You see, we partly become who we think others think we are. If the world's walls and screens keep telling you visually that your home is small, peripheral, less central, you start absorbing that message. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. Identity is social, which brings me to the third pillar. Social identity and status cues. Size and central placement are status signals. When something is placed right there in the center, or when something is bigger than the rest, the brain reads important, high status, sets the rules. But when something is placed on the sidelines, on the margins, and is smaller, the brain reads secondary, doesn't set the rules, but follows the rules. That's how hierarchies get normalized without a single word being uttered. Fourth, stereotype rate. When a setting suddenly tells the group, you are less, performance drops under pressure. Picture a math classroom in Accra, Algeria, or Nairobi, with that Mercator Map above the board. Tiny Africa, you haven't said anything negative, but you have created a backdrop of smallness that kills confidence from the word go. Fifth, system justification. Humans often defend the status quo, especially when it is everywhere. If the distorted map is the wallpaper of the world, people unconsciously rationalize it. If it's on every wall, then it must be fine. That's how bad defaults survive for centuries. Sixth, cultivation and media diet. Repeated images cultivate a worldview. A lifetime of small Africa images leads to small Africa expectations about investment, diplomacy, and even who should host summits. It whispers, aim lower because you're smaller. Seventh, negotiation psychology. In bargaining, perceived scale matters a lot. Parties with big mental footprints set higher targets and get better outcomes. If Africa is pictured as small, outsiders feel larger by comparison, and large players set the terms. The map becomes a silent negotiator in the room. Eighth, center stage effect. Things in the middle of a display are always judged as more important. The Mercator maps center the North Atlantic and Europe. The global story literally revolves around them. Africa is pushed down, almost out of sight and out of clout, with little prominence. Ninth, child development. Kids learn with pictures first and abstractions later. If the picture is wrong, the related education it builds is also wrong. It takes years to unlearn a bad image. Why should the worldview of African children be literally rooted in a lie? Fellow Africans, that's why this isn't just a map. It's a daily amplifier on who belongs at the center of the world and who belongs at the margins. It's indeed time to fix the picture so that we can fix the script that is running in our heads. And that's why the African Union's move is important. It's about time. The African Union has endorsed the Correct the Map campaign.
Everything you think you know about our world is a distortion of reality. Yep, we're still using a 16th century map projection that intentionally minimizes Africa's true size. Look at these two land masses. On most world maps, they appear almost equal. The truth? Africa is 14 times larger than Greenland. Africa isn't just big, it's a giant. It's the size of the United States, China, India, Japan, Mexico, and most of Europe combined. This isn't just about size. It's about power and perception. It's about a false sense of superiority over the global south. And this needs to change. The solution? The Equal Earth projection, a map that shows our world as it truly is. We need your help to make it the global standard. Join the movement. Let's correct the map together. Sign the petition today.
Led by Africa No Filter and Speak Up Africa, the African Union wants the Equal Earth projection to become the new standard in our classrooms, offices, international institutions, everywhere. As Selma Malika Haddadi from the African Union put it, the Mercator Map makes Africa appear marginal. And that, my friends, is not a cartographic accident. It's not. It's a 500-year misinformation campaign. I remember last year in 2024, I was traveling through Tanzania, great country. We traveled from Arusha to Tanga in the coastal part. We passed through Moshi, which sits at the very foot of Mount Kilimanjaro, Africa's tallest mountain. This drive gave me an idea of Tanzania's sheer size. Yet on the Mercator map, Tanzania looks smaller than it really is. Tanzania is bigger than Germany, France, and the United Kingdom combined. But you wouldn't know that if you just glanced at the map. Despite this vastness, much of Tanzania's land remains uncultivated, which mirrors the agricultural situation in the rest of Africa. Over 60% of the world's unused arable land is right here in Africa. Think about that. While the world talks about food shortages, Africa literally holds the farmland that could feed the planet. Africa can feed itself and feed the world. That's how big Africa is. Size must now translate to strength. We must make this size count. It's not just about bragging. It's about making sure it counts. Fellow Africans, don't underestimate this. When the world leaders sit at the UN, in the UN and behind them hangs the Mercator map, Europe enlarged and Africa minimized, it influences decisions. Subconsciously, Africa looks weaker, smaller, easier to dismiss. Perception has real-world consequences. Look at how America treats Africa compared to the Gulf states. Donald Trump recently toured the Gulf states. He toured Saudi Arabia, he toured Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. He was bowing down to their kings and signing deals worth billions. But when it came to Africa, do you know what he did? He summoned 5 African presidents to the White House, like schoolboys being called to the principal's office. That's perception, that's respect for the Gulf states and lack of it for Africa. Because of this perception, the US has already deported convicted criminals from its prisons to Eswatini and South Sudan here in Africa. It is planning to deport even more to Rwanda and several other African countries. But do you ever hear of America deporting criminals to the Gulf, to Europe? No, you don't. Deportation to Africa are seen as convenient, normal, because perception says that Africa is a place that you can dump what you don't want or what you don't need. It doesn't stop there. Africa is the second most populous continent in the world with 1.4 billion people. Yet we have 0 permanent seats on the UN Security Council. Countries with far fewer people, far less land, far less historical impact, they hold veto power, while Africa watches from the sidelines. And even in football, the world's game, perception shrinks us. Africa has 57 countries, over 1 billion people, and yet gets fewer World Cup slots than Europe, which has far less people than Africa. How is that fair? It's another quiet way of saying, Africa, you small, you stay in your lane. Meanwhile, Africa keeps trooping to summits in Washington, in Moscow, in Saudi Arabia, in Tokyo, in Seoul. But have you ever heard of European leaders trooping en masse to an Africa-Europe summit in Addis Ababa? Have you ever heard of that? Or Gulf monarchs attending an Africa-Gulf summit in Kampala? No, it's always Africa being summoned. That's what distorted perception does. When the world thinks that you are small, it treats you as small. It summons you. It lectures you. It dictates terms to you. This is why correcting the map matters. It's about geographical accuracy. It's about respect. It's about perception. It's about reality. And it's about time. So here's the bottom line. The world keeps treating Africa as small, partly because that's how Africa has been pictured for centuries. The Mercator Map shrank us, and the world followed suit. It all begins with perception, and perception begins with a picture on the wall. If the picture says that you're small, the world will treat you as small. But if the picture rightly shows your true size, vast, central, powerful, the world will have to deal with you differently. Here's what must happen next. African governments must not wait for the United Nations or the World Bank or any entity. We don't need permission. We don't. Ban the Mercator projection from our schools, our ministries, our media, all over Africa, and roll out the Equal Earth projection across the continent. Decolonize our minds and our education. Perception shapes reality. We cannot afford to keep seeing ourselves through the lens of a lie. The map must change and Africa must claim its true size, its true dignity, and its true power once and for all. One more thing, as we do that, we must also deal with the big man syndrome here in Africa because we cannot have imperial presidencies continually making Africa smaller economically. We cannot have that. We must now ensure that we slay those imperial presidencies that are modeled after Western style democracy once and for all.